Hello there, good morning, and a very warm welcome to our webinar today, Maternity Pay in Sage 50 Payroll. This is one of the sessions that counts towards our statutory payments digital badge, which you can earn by attending at least 4 different sessions plus a quiz to test your knowledge. But I'll tell you more about how you get that badge later on in the webinar. My name's Duncan, I'm your host and presenter, and I am joined today by my colleague Alice, who's standing by in the background, ready and waiting to answer your questions. Let's now take a look at what we'll cover in the webinar. So I'm going to begin with an introduction to statutory maternity pay, including some of the qualifying conditions and rules. We're then going to give you some practical demonstrations, starting with recording maternity details in your software, and I will show you a couple of different ways that you can do that. We'll then move on to the payroll process and talk about adjusting your employees' payments, and I'll highlight the Make Up Basic option, as well as doing manual adjustments to salary pay. And then we'll show you how to reclaim your statutory payment at the end of the month by running your P32 report and submitting an EPS. And we'll finish with 5 or 10 minutes on some troubleshooting of common issues that people tend to come across when dealing with type of statutory payment. And we'll try and stick around at the end as well to give you plenty of time to get answers to your questions. So that's what we've got lined up for you. Let's get straight on with our introduction. So first of all, what is SMP? Well, it stands for Statutory Maternity Pay, and it's a payment made by employers to their employees when they take time off work to have a baby. If the employee qualifies for the payment, they would get 6 weeks of SMP at the higher rate, which is 90% of the employee's average weekly earnings, or AWE. And that's then followed by 33 weeks at the standard rate of SMP, which for the current tax year is £184.03 per week, or 90% of average weekly earnings if lower. Now, that standard rate will increase in the new tax year, and it's going up to £187.18 per week. And that change will be made automatically for maternity leave that spans tax years once you've installed the year-end update, which will be released in the coming weeks, and you've set your process date into that new year. Now, to qualify for the payment, the employee must be eligible. So I'll just run through the main eligibility points. You can read more on these on the gov.uk website. So an employee must be on your payroll in the qualifying week, that is 15 weeks before the baby is due. They need to give you the correct notice, so 15 weeks to notify that they're entitled to maternity leave and pay, and 28 days notice of the date that they want to start their leave. They'll need to provide proof that they're pregnant. It's usually the MAP-B1 certificate that they get from the midwife or doctor. They must be continuously employed by you for at least 26 weeks up to any day in the qualifying week, 26 weeks up to the 15th week before the due date. And their average earnings must be at least £123 per week in the 8-week relevant period. So that is the period leading up to the qualifying week. Now, just to visualize some of those dates on a timeline, let's just run through the key dates now. So we're going to count back from the due date, also known as the expected week of confinement, or EWC. And if we count back 15 weeks, that brings us to the qualifying week, which is a really key date when it comes to SMP entitlement and calculations. Now, in order to qualify for the payment, the employee's latest start date with you as their employer must be at least 26 weeks before that qualifying week. And then the average earnings, which determines the higher rate of SMP and must be above £123 to qualify, is taken in that 8-week period that leads up to the qualifying week. A couple of other key dates to be aware of. The earliest date that maternity leave can begin is usually 11 weeks before the due date. The exception being if the baby is born before that point, in which case SMP will begin the day after the date of birth. And for employees who are off work sick with a pregnancy-related sickness, if they're receiving SSP, in the 4th week before the baby is due, at that point they must transfer to SMP, even if they had originally planned to start their SMP later than that point. And you would see prompts in the program if you're recording SSP and you reach that transfer limit. So those are some of the key dates around statutory maternity pay. How is it funded? Well, it is funded, it's paid by the employer, but it is funded mostly by the government. So any statutory parental payment can be reclaimed from HMRC. This is done at the end of each tax month by reducing your liability that you need to pay over. Now, most employers can reclaim 92% of statutory parental payments paid out. But if you qualify for small employers relief, you'd actually get 103% of the statutory payment back. You'd usually qualify for small employers relief if your total Class 1 national insurance contributions were £45,000 or less in the tax year prior to the qualifying or matching week. And there's a setting in Sage 50 Payroll that you must select if you qualify for small employers relief so that the correct amount is calculated on the reclaim. So we're going to take a look at that first, because this is something that you would set up before you process the statutory payment. So if I just bring the slides down, I'm going to first of all check whether I would qualify for small employers relief. And I'm going to do this by running the P32 report for the previous tax year, the tax year before my employee's qualifying week. So really simple to do. Start by changing your process date to the 5th of April of the tax year you want to check. So in my case, 5th of April 2024 being the last day of the previous tax year. And then run the P32 report, which I'm going to run from my payroll links just here, but you would also find within the main reports option in the period end folder. Now, usually with a P32, you would run it for the specific month that you're making a payment for, but we want to check the full year for the previous tax year. So I'm going to set the criteria to be between month 1 and 12. If I then click OK, that will open the report preview. You can see this is for the full tax year ending 5th of April 2024. And the figure I need to check is the gross national insurance, item number 4. And if this is £45,000 or less, that would indicate that I qualify for the small employers relief. So you can see in this example, my gross national insurance is less than £45,000. So what I need to do before I process any statutory parental payment is to check my small employers relief setting. So first of all, I'll set my process date back to the next pay date. It's going to be the 31st of January. And then to find the small employers relief setting, simply go to Company and then Settings. And it's the checkbox on the right-hand side on the Details tab, which I have already selected to confirm that I am eligible for that. So if you're not eligible, you should check that that box is not ticked and you would get the 92% reclaim. We'd recommend you do this check at the start of each tax year as well, just to reconfirm whether you're eligible for it. So mine's already selected, so I'm all set up and good to go in terms of reclaiming. So that's just a little bit around the legislation, eligibility and reclaiming the statutory payment. But we're now going to move on to the more practical side of things. We're going to take a look at how you'd actually process maternity pay in your Sage 50 payroll software. So this is really simple to do. You'll just need a little bit of information from your employee. So first of all, you will need to know the date that the employee will be starting their maternity leave. So the date at which you want to start SMP payments. And you'll also need to see the medical evidence, which is usually the MAP-B1 certificate, which will confirm the baby's due date. Now, assuming you've got both of those bits of information, you've got everything that you need to set this up in your program. So let's take a look at how you'd go ahead and do that. So two ways that we can record the maternity details. I'm going to show you both. And I'm going to start with the recording maternity option, also known as Quick SMP. Now, the way that this works is you start by selecting the employee who's going on maternity leave. So I've highlighted them in the list there, employee 1. And then from your payroll links section, just here, you'll find links to record various statutory payments. So in this case, it is the recording maternity link that I need to choose. But if you can't see the links section, maybe because you've got quite a small screen, you will find the same option if you go to the employee tasks. We can see recording maternity is just here as well. So if I go into recording maternity, that opens the Quick SMP screen. First thing to do is to tick the box confirming we've received the medical evidence or the MAP-B1 certificate. And then from that evidence, we can then record the expected date of birth, which for this particular employee is the 25th of January. You would then click Check Entitlement, and Payroll will check whether the qualifying conditions have been met. And you can see on the right-hand side, we've confirmed we've received the medical evidence. This employee has worked for long enough and they earn enough to qualify for this payment. So we're looking for 3 green ticks on the right-hand side. What you then need to record is the employee's last day of work, and SMP payments will begin the following day. And in this example, the employee is working up until the 17th of January. That's their last day of work. So I'm going to enter that into the box just here, and it means their first day of SMP will be the 18th of January. Now, you also have boxes to record the actual date of birth and the employee's return to work date. But if you don't know that at this point when you're setting it up, you can leave them blank. You can come back and fill them in later. And what we now have is a list of the key dates for this employee on the right-hand side and their SMP entitlement shown towards the bottom right-hand corner. So just checking some of these key dates. Due date we entered from the MAP-B1 certificate, and the next date is the qualifying week. So in this example, the qualifying week started on the 6th of October. To qualify, the employee must have been employed on or before the 20th of April in this case. And the set period where the average earnings have been calculated are between these 2 dates. The earliest date leave can start, so 11 weeks before the due date, is the 3rd of November. Of course, this employee has chosen to start their maternity a lot closer to the due date. And then if they take the full 39 weeks of paid maternity leave, the last day of the maternity pay period, in this case, it's going to end up being the 17th of October. And the entitlement is shown just underneath. This is the statutory entitlement. You may have a company maternity scheme which pays above these rates, and we'll come to adjusting payments a little bit later on in the webinar. But we have 6 weeks here at the higher rate. So this figure here is 90% of my employee's average weekly earnings. It's followed by 33 weeks at the standard rate. And for now, it's displaying the standard rate for the current tax year. But once you've installed the year-end update and your process date moves into the new tax year, this grid will also show the new standard rate for the new tax year, which will be a slight increase to 187.18. Now, the average earnings are calculated automatically, but can be overridden if required. So to check the average earnings, you can click this option for earnings during set period. And this will display the payments that were processed in the 8-week set period. And from these 2 monthly payments, an average weekly amount has been calculated for us. But if required, that can be overridden. You can type a different figure into that box. And there's an area to record special circumstances. So these are rarely used, but if the employee has been absent from work due to a trade dispute between these dates, you would need to enter the number of weeks they were on trade dispute, as that will affect their length of service. If the maternity pay has started early due to sickness, 4 weeks before the due date, you can record that by ticking this box. Or if it started earlier than 11 weeks before the due date due to an early birth, you would select this checkbox. But none of this applies to me, so I'm just going to cancel out. So that's the maternity details recorded. We can go ahead and save the details. And if you want to print a summary of this information, just hit the print option here to generate a report. I'll show you what that report looks like. So it confirms the qualifying conditions have been met. It confirms the average earnings during the set period and all of those key dates. And it does display the entitlement based on current legislation. But as I say, if it spans a new tax year, once you've installed the year-end update when that's available, and you set your process date into the new year, you can rerun this report, which will show the new standard rate as well. So it might be useful for your payroll records, or even as something to give to your employee. So that's one way to record the maternity details. I just want to quickly show you the other way to record that same information. So you can do it directly in the employee record by selecting the Absence tab here at the top of the screen, and then under Further Information, you would click onto SMP. Now, because I've already entered the details via the quick SMP screen, these are already showing for me, but I would enter the due date, last day of work, ended work for MPP. You would need to click this button to calculate the average weekly gross, but that was already calculated for me in the quick SMP screen, and you would tick this box to say you've received the medical evidence. This screen also shows you how the average has been calculated. It's based on these two payments. That's my average earnings. And it also shows the entitlement that we saw in the quick SMP screen, and the entitlement previously paid and currently due. So that's quite useful to show you what's due up to your current process date. So if you do enter it directly in the employee record, if there are any existing maternity details entered first, you will need to clear a year-to-date value, but we'll come on to that. It's one of our common scenarios a little bit later on when we look at troubleshooting. Now, once the maternity details are entered, you can then check the SMP amount for your next pay run. So I've already set my process date to my January pay date, and like any other statutory payment, the amount payable will be calculated up to the process date based on the absence information entered. If I go into the Enter Payment screen, you'll see I've already got the full salary entered, so that will need adjusting, which we'll come on to later. But to check the SMP amount, simply click the Summary tab, and then you'll see Statutory Maternity Pay here within the Summary of Payments. So this displays the total amount currently due. But to see a breakdown of that amount, you can click this drop-down arrow, which takes you into the SMP details. And then just check in the Entitlement tab, we can see the maternity pay period started on the 18th of January. Our current process date is the 31st of January. So there are exactly 2 weeks that are payable in the current period, and those 2 weeks have been calculated at the higher rate. So I've checked that the SMP appears correctly. I'm happy with that value. And then all we would then need to do is to make the necessary adjustments to the payments. So before I do that, let's just recap recording the maternity details. So 2 things that you would need are the date the employee wants to start their maternity leave and the medical evidence. So once you've got that MAP B1 form or other evidence, you can then go into the quick SMP screen via the recording maternity link to record the due date, check the entitlement and the last day of work. Alternatively, within the employee record, on the absence tab, you can go into SMP, and from there you can enter the relevant dates, calculate the average earnings, and then check the entitlement tab to get a view of that employee's entitlement. Now, whichever way you do enter it, if you want to grab that report, the SMP details report, you can just go into the recording maternity link, and then there'll be a print option at the bottom. We then had a quick look in enter payments to check that the maternity pay was calculating, which it was, and to see a breakdown of the total amount calculated, you can select it and click the drop down arrow. That takes you into the SMP details. And if you check the entitlement tab, show you what's previously paid, currently due, and what the full entitlement is for that 39 weeks. So what we need to think about next is adjusting our employees' payments. So it would depend on the employee's contract, exactly how this is done. So if, for example, you have a company or occupational maternity pay scheme that pays over and above the statutory payment rates, you might consider using the Make Up Basic option to pay your employee a specific amount, maybe their full usual pay. If you don't have a company maternity scheme, you would need to do a manual adjustment to the salary or basic pay so that the employee is being paid for the hours or days that they actually worked in that period. And then moving forward, that would tend to be reduced down to zero for the remainder of the maternity leave. So we're going to take a look at adjusting the payments in the demo. Let's just switch back to that now. So I've got the employee selected. Let's just jump back into the enter payment screen. So for this first example, I'm going to use Make Up Basic. So my employee receives their full salary made up of statutory maternity pay and salary. And the way you do that is you start by entering the full amount you want the employee to receive, so £2,000 in this example. And then if you go to the Summary tab, you'll find the Make Up Basic option here at the bottom. If I click Make Up Basic, it'll then tell me that the hours or number value of salary will need to be reduced. So this will be showing me the first payment on the payslip, and that is the one that I want to adjust. You do have the option of saying no if you have multiple payments, and then you can adjust the one that you need to reduce. But in this case, it is salary that needs to be reduced. I'm going to click yes to continue, and that does an automatic adjustment. You can see my employee's total gross pay is now their usual £2,000 salary. And looking back on the payments tab, you can see the hours or number has been adjusted. So the amount has been reduced by the amount of statutory pay. And you can repeat that process in any period where there's a specific amount you want your employee to see. So typically that would be their full basic pay. Now, the other way to approach this would be if you don't have a company scheme and you just want to pay the employee for the days or the hours that they've worked in that period. And the way that you calculate this will depend on your company procedures. So have a think about how you would work out a part period salary for a new starter or an employee leaving. And you would probably apply the same principle if you need to do a manual adjustment during parental leave. So to give you an example, for this particular employee, I want to pay them for the working days up to the day they started the maternity leave. So I have calculated that that is 13 days in January out of a possible 23. So the way I'm going to do a manual adjustment is I'm still going to adjust the hours or number value. I'm going to do 13 divided by 23 to pay them a reduced amount of salary reflecting the number of days they actually worked. Now that is just one example. There are other ways to work out maybe a daily rate. Could be based on the annual salary. But whatever way you would normally do this in your company's process is how you would adjust it when dealing with parental pay. And that is then added to the statutory maternity pay. So they are still nearly getting their full salary, but obviously maternity pay is 90% of their average earnings. One other thing to consider when adjusting payments is pension contributions. So for most pension schemes, when an employee is on paid maternity leave, the employer is required to continue paying the usual contribution into the pension rather than a reduced contribution based on reduced pay. So if you need to enter a specific amount for the employer's contribution, you can do this by going into the employee record, go to the pensions tab, just manage your pension scheme and click edit. And rather than calculating a percentage, I'm just going to change it to a fixed amount. And I've checked back and I know that the fixed amount we normally contribute is £44.40. So I'm going to set the employer contribution to that fixed amount for the duration of the maternity leave. And that way we are maintaining our contribution, but the employee's contribution is still being based on what they're actually earning. So if I click employers, you can see it's now using that fixed amount rather than the calculated amount on that reduced pay. So quick look at some of the reports. Going into my pre-update reports, we'll take a look at a pay slip just to show you that all statutory payments will have their own line on the pay slip. So parental payments have the parental pay label, like so. So this is the amount of statutory pay, and this is the basic pay that we have manually adjusted. Still got that original employer pension contribution and the deductions from the employee. And this is the employee's net pay amount. And reports such as payment summary reports will also have a column for statutory parental payments. So it's just including this employee for now. But you can see that parental payments has a value in that column. So once we're happy with those payments, we would complete the pay run in the usual way. So updating the records. And then you would send your full payment submission to HMRC, reporting the taxable pay and deductions in the usual way. So that's the pay run complete. Let's just go back and recap adjusting the employee's payments. So I've showed you two ways there that you can adjust an employee's payment. You could choose to use the make up basic option. So that works by entering the full amount you want an employee to receive. In my case, it was £2,000 salary. And then on the summary tab, click the make up basic option and then click yes to adjust the appropriate payment. And then the other thing we looked at was adjusting manually. So you can either adjust the hours or the rate and make that equal what you want to pay them for the days or the hours that they've worked in that period. Other thing to be aware of is that usually an employer pension contribution during paid maternity leave is based on the employee's normal pay, so their pre-maternity pay. So you may need to enter a fixed amount as your pension contribution to override the calculated percentage. But if you're at all unsure, I'd recommend you check with your pension provider to get clarification on the specific pension scheme rules in your case. So moving on next, I'm going to talk about reclaiming statutory payments. We did mention this at the start of the webinar, so you should be aware that you would get at least 92% of any statutory parental payment back from the government. If you qualify for small employers relief, you get 103%. So assuming you've already set your small employers relief setting as required, when you get to the end of the tax month, all you then need to do is run the P32 report, which will show you any statutory payments that you've recovered, including NI compensation if you're a small employer. That will then reduce the amount payable to HMRC, so that's how you reclaim it. You offset it against the tax and the national insurance you would have been paying over, and you would need to do an EPS submission at the end of the month to report the reclaim values. So that is a monthly submission. Even if your payroll is run weekly, you'd wait until the end of the tax month to do this, and then that will be kind of credited against your PAYE account, reducing the amount that you need to pay. So a quick look at those steps in the program. So you'll see that I've already updated records and submitted my FPS for my January pay date, 31st of January. All of my employees are paid monthly. So I am now ready to run the P32 report. I'm going to run it from the payroll links. If I click on P32 report just here, it will ask me for the tax month I'm running it for, which in this case is tax month 10 for the January tax month. And then if we just take a look at this, you'll see that in items 6 and 7, I do have SMP recovered. So that's 100% of what I paid. And the NI compensation is the 3% I get in addition as a small employer. So I'm recovering 103%. If you're not a small employer, you would get 92% showing against item 6. So what that has done in turn is it's reduced the total amount due. So it's being offset against the tax and the national insurance I deducted from my employees. So what I'm paying is my liability less the amounts I've reclaimed. So that's what you need to pay, and that's how you reclaim it. But you also need to do an employer payment summary. So there is a quick link for this as well on the payroll links, or alternatively, you can go to e-submissions and you can choose employer payment summary from here. It'll ask you why you're sending one. So choose this first option, you're adjusting your payment because you're recovering statutory pay. It'll confirm the tax month the submission relates to. So in this case, it is tax month 10. It'll then show the amounts recovered for the tax year to date. So EPS is always a year-to-date submission. So this is the first recovery I've made in this tax year. But when I do this at the end of next month, it'll show the statutory maternity pay recovered to date. So not just that month, it will show the year to date. So I'm happy with those figures. CIS deduction suffered doesn't apply to me, nor does apprenticeship levy. And when I click on to finish, it then takes you into the submission. So you would simply click continue. You would click submit and then submit once more. And that will then send the amounts reclaimed to HMRC. If you want to view the information that was on that EPS, simply go into your eSubmissions log here on the left-hand side. And you can see my latest submission was an EPS. If I check the details, I can go to more details, and that actually shows me the figures that were included. So that's reclaiming the statutory payment. It works exactly the same for paternity, adoption, shared parental, any parental payment, but just be aware you cannot reclaim statutory sick pay in this way. SSP is fully funded by the employer. And your deadline to send an EPS is the 19th of the following month. So you now know how to process and reclaim SMP, but I want to finish with 5 minutes or so on troubleshooting. And I want to start with a very common scenario that might affect you if you have an employee who has received SMP in the past. So for employees that have previously received SMP, there is certain information that will be stored in their employee record. And that is the number of weeks of SMP that has been paid. And that's always retained because sometimes maternity leave can span more than one tax year. So the number of weeks doesn't automatically get cleared down when you set up the next spell of maternity. Now, if you just go directly into the employee record and enter new details for the next child, what you'll find is that the year-to-date values haven't been cleared, so it doesn't calculate any SMP. So there's two ways you can deal with this. You can either manually reset the week's SMP paid in the year-to-date values, or you can record the details using the recording maternity link. And if it detects existing maternity details, it will ask you if you want to clear them. So I just want to show you how this works in the program. So let's just bring that down again. So I'm just going to set my next pay date, which will be the 28th of February. I have a different employee starting maternity leave this month. And if I just go into their employee record, go to absence and SMP, what I can see straight away is they have received this in the past. It was quite some time ago now, 8 years ago, in 2017, they were on maternity leave. But what that means is if I check their year-to-date values, if I go to employment and year-to-date values and go to the statutory payments tab, we do still have 39 weeks of SMP paid. Now, because that figure's there, it means that the SMP for the next child won't calculate. So to work around this, you would either manually change that to 0 and then go ahead and enter the new maternity details. Or if you don't want to do it that way, if you choose the recording maternity link, because there are existing maternity details entered, it will pop up with this message. Now, you do need to be careful when you see this message. If you have an employee currently receiving SMP and you go in to check their maternity details, you won't want to clear those out for a second child. So if you're ever unsure when you see this message why it's popping up and what you need to do, always click no in the first instance. And that then reminds me, oh yes, this is old information. So actually I need to reset that for the next child. So if I go in to recording maternity now and click yes, that clears everything out, including the year-to-date value. And it just means I can then enter the maternity details for the next child. All the qualifying conditions are being met here. I can then save the details. And if I check the SMP amount, we can see that it is now calculating. So if it is a second child, if there's already maternity details there, you'll need to make sure this has been cleared, either by using the quick SMP screen or by manually setting the weeks paid back to 0. So I just want to watch out for, I have linked to further support in our article on that one. Quickly before we end, some other troubleshooting tips. So if there's no SMP calculating, one of the most common reasons is it's been paid for a previous child and the year-to-date value for weeks paid hasn't been cleared. So 2 solutions. You can either use quick SMP to clear everything and then enter the information for the next child, or you could manually clear the SMP weeks paid from the year-to-date values. Another reason for SMP not calculating might be if the average earnings are too low. So you can check the average earnings either in the quick SMP screen, where they calculate automatically, or in the employee record. Make sure you've clicked the auto calc button, and average earnings will need to be £123 or more to qualify. That actually increases to £125 in the new tax year. So if they are too low, you need to issue an SMP1 form so that the employee can then make a claim for maternity allowance. Another reason it might not calculate is if you've selected a box for manual statutory maternity pay calculations. So that checkbox is in the employee record in the SMP section, just towards the bottom. If you try and enter the details using quick SMP, you will be alerted if that box is selected and given the option to clear it. So just some common reasons why it might not calculate. The other issue some people come across is that the SMP amount is different to what they're expecting. First thing to check on that one is your process date. So have you entered the correct process date for this period? Is it the date the employee is being paid? If not, change it to the correct process date, but also be aware that statutory payments are calculated up to that date. So if you usually pay your employees in arrears or for some days in advance, you might find that the first and last SMP payments will be more or less than expected due to the timings of when you would usually pay your employees and at what period they're being paid for. So check you've got the right process date entered, and always keep in mind that the statutory pay will calculate up to that date. And the other one, if you're feeling that the standard rate of SMP is lower than what you're expecting, it could be that 90% of average weekly earnings is lower than the standard rate. So remember, the standard rate is the lower of £184.03 per week, or 90% of average weekly earnings. So for some stuff, they might end up effectively with the same rate throughout all of their maternity leave. So that was my last troubleshooting tip, and we've got a few minutes left of the scheduled time, but we will stick around just to ensure we've sent out as many answers to your questions as possible. In terms of further support, I did want to mention a little bit more about our statutory payments badge. So this is one of the sessions that counts towards the digital badge, Statutory Payments 2025. To earn your badge, you must attend at least 4 different sessions between sick pay, maternity pay, paternity, shared parental, and HR advice, plus the statutory payments quiz. So we've got 2 dates for most of the sessions. We've already ran our first sick pay session, so just the one of those, and one for the HR advice. If you qualify for that badge, it will be sent via email by the end of February. You must use the same email address to register for the different sessions as well. So it'd be great to see you at the other sessions and get you earning that digital badge. Other help is available online on our help centre, sage.co.uk/help. If you click any help option in Sage 50 Payroll, it will take you to the same content. So if you do need to get in touch with our support team, if you visit our help centre, select the topic you need help with and click the Get in Touch link, you'll find all of the contact details there for you. And another great learning resource for you is Sage University, sageu.com. From there, you can take our e-learning courses, online certification, and various bite-sized learning courses as well. So that does bring us to the end of the presentation. As I say, I am going to stick around and give Alice a hand with any remaining questions. If you'd like a copy of the handouts, do remember to download them. And any Q&A that you want to keep hold of, you need to copy and paste that into another document. We will send you a follow-up email later on this afternoon, which contains a recording of today's session if there's anything you'd like to catch up on that you may have missed. And we'd also invite you to take our webinar survey when you leave us today. So when you end the webinar or when you exit the webinar, you'll be asked to just complete a short survey. We do read all of your responses, and it helps us to keep these sessions the best they can be, get them continuously improving. So if you wouldn't mind completing that, I'd very much appreciate it. But I am going to go on to mute for now. I'm going to help out with some of the questions, and then I will come back once we've tackled those just to say goodbye. So I'll speak to you shortly. Hi everyone, and thank you so much for sending those questions through. I think we're just getting the final answers out to a few of those. So I just wanted to take one moment just to thank you all for joining us at the webinar today. I hope you've found that session useful and you've learned something from it. And if you wouldn't mind completing the survey, as I say, to let us know what you thought, we'd very much appreciate that. That's about all the time that we've got though. So I'm going to say my goodbye, and it'd be great to see you on some of our other statutory payments webinars and get yourself earning that digital badge. Enjoy the rest of your week, and maybe we'll see you on another webinar soon. It's goodbye for now.